Okay, well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Dr. Serena Wadhwa. I'm your host for the Pendulum, Real Talk the Pendulum podcast. And today I have a guest speaker. I'm so excited to bring Steph Fowler to share the screen with me. I'm going to actually share a PowerPoint so you have some information that you can kind of peruse here. Just give me 1 second. Hopefully you can see this. Let me see here. But really quick before we get started, today, our guest speaker is Steph Fowler, and then our next podcast will be on June 11th, and another guest speaker is scheduled for that day. But this is a little background about Steph Fowler. And for those of you that have been listening in, two different podcasts that I've held through the years, Steph was a previous guest on the Radio Panipuri's uh, Pathways to Wellness podcast, where she talked about narrative therapy. And so I was trying to find that podcast to kind of link it as an archive on the slides, and I could not find it in time. So I'm hoping that we can somehow link it so that people have a copy of that and can hear a before and after, as we were just talking about before we went live. So
Yeah.
um, so kind of just to dive right in, first question, what got you into the field? Because, as I mentioned, part of, the reason for this particular podcast is really to kind of bring the human component to professionals, and that we are human first, and have struggles and things just like people that we serve, that we go to school and we get training, and we learn how to you know do things differently because of that. But at the same time, we're still human. So
hmm
what were, whatever you're willing to share, what was your experience that brought you into this field?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like a lot of people, a lot of people in the field, I've, had a lot of empathy. I
Yeah.
ended up being sort of the person that people came to talk about things. So that was always a little bit baked in. And then I think that I've also always just been somebody who's tried to understand the world and make sense of things. And so psychology kind of became interesting for that reason. When I went to college, I minored in psychology. And then after I got out into working, I was in a team building exercise where they made us take the Myers-Briggs, which
Mm.
I know there's mixed everything about that, all of that notwithstanding. That was sort of the thing that cued me of like, oh, maybe I could consider going into this field, because that said that that was something that people with my personality might enjoy. It was like nurses and counselors, and I was like, I'm not drawing blood, so maybe I can consider being a therapist. And so it was a couple years later that I ended up going to grad school and making that change.
Oh, okay. And then so here you are in the field,
Mhm.
and yeah, and I can relate with the empathy and the curiosity. I mean, I think those are really, really big characteristics of the field. You have to have some level of empathy. And then, a lot of times too, it's a very different kind of empathy too than your mainstream, so to speak, empathy. And I
Yeah.
tell people that, students that I teach in the counseling field, that clinical empathy is a little bit different than mainstream empathy. And it's not the same thing as sympathy by far.
Yeah.
So
hmm
to recognize that, and then the curiosity, which I really relate when you said that, just curious about the world. I have 50 million questions about everything. And people don't seem to get that. And
I want to make it all make sense and pull
right,
everything together. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, totally. Can you talk a little bit about how you came up with the name of your practice? Because I love it, and your motto. I think it's
Yeah.
very encompassing and inclusive. And I think pretty much anyone can relate to that to some degree, because even though people don't want to outwardly admit to it,
Hmm.
there might be a little part of them that's like, oh, yeah, I can
Yeah.
rebel a little bit. So,
Yeah. So I think that, it sort of came out of, it was something that was, I was considering as I was starting my practices, like how I wanted to attract working with clients who maybe didn't fit in a lot of ways. And
mhm.
so I have kind of used the word misfit as the deepest term of endearment for a long time, because to
Yeah.
me, misfit or weirdo, like those are terms that mean that you're being authentic, is the way that I feel that
Oh,
and think of that. As like, if you're willing to misfit, if you're willing to be weird, then you're being all of yourself, most likely. And
yeah.
so it's that coming back to and embracing all of ourselves is where I was kind of starting in my practice. And then we haven't gotten to this yet, but when I became chronically ill and disabled and got into kind of the chronic illness and disability community, there's just like it's a different flavor, but same idea of like moving through the world that was not made for you and having to figure out how to navigate that in a very different way, where maybe the not fitting in is less of a choice and more of a circumstance. And no matter what we do, can't fit into those models that we've been expected to. And so, out of my personal experience of having long COVID and kind of navigating all of that and realizing I really wanted to work with clients who also knew that struggle and
Yeah.
either have mysterious illnesses or dynamic disabilities that change or adjusting to kind of those things.
Oh, wait, your microphone or something happened. What?
Line.
Oh, there you are. Okay, we
Oh,
got you.
did you lose me?
Yeah, I lost you for just a split second.
Okay. Um, yeah, so that was how Misfit Mental Health was born, and how I kind of came up with the tagline depathologizing nonconformity.
Oh, love
Um,
it.
in part, that's bringing in the narrative therapy of just kind of depathologizing a lot of normalized experiences that we all have that don't need to be pathologized, but recognizing that nonconformity isn't, it doesn't have to be a disorder, doesn't have to be a problem, doesn't have to be all of these things that
An
it gets
illness.
associated with. Right. Yeah. It could just be that maybe the world's not set up for us,
Right.
and that's the real problem. And so,
Right.
yeah, so that's sort of how I came to be here with Misfit Mental
Yeah,
Health.
it's great. And the website is great. I checked it out and I really appreciated how you approach that too. I mean, coming from a place of authenticity, and recognizing that it is a term of endearment that describes just being outside the box,
Yeah, exactly.
that you don't fit in and that's okay. And recognizing, well, if you don't fit into the norm, then how do you find your place in the world?
Hmm.
And that's really the struggle, right? The kind of the pendulum that people experience sometimes of, this kind of conformed society and being this non-conformist, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And where do you find that kind of that balance with, how much do I want to conform? Where do I want to conform? Do I really need to conform?
Yeah.
Kind of a
Yep.
thing. And on so many different levels too. So
Very much so.
yeah. And so kind of, bringing then, you mentioned that prior to the pandemic, when this happened for you, that this was kind of the practice and that you had started it and got it up and going. And then, we're working with individuals that fit this and we're really drawn to wanting to be their authentic selves and have their own space, so to
Hmm.
speak, right? And then the pandemic hit.
Hmm.
And that was a totally different experience.
Yeah, that has changed everything. I mean, I think that there's a lot of us that would say that that's true across the board, that that's changed everything. But
Completely.
there's some of us who know that in our bodies in a different way, like it has changed us in a way that we can't go back to how things used to be.
Right.
So yeah, it was right like as the pandemic hit. I mean, I know most therapists were struggling at that time to
Yeah.
really adjust to, oh gosh, we're going to telehealth and how do I make this switch and is insurance going to cover that and what do I code and how's this going? And we're doing this for 2 weeks. Oh, we're doing this for a lot longer than 2 weeks. Okay, like it was just so many adjustments and so much
Yes.
uncertainty at once. And as that was all hitting, I had started having some health problems that were hard to navigate when, healthcare was really complicated to navigate at that time if you could even get an appointment.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff that I was dealing with, they had to see me in person, which was a big undertaking then. But it ended up, long story short, that a couple years ago I ended up getting diagnosed with long COVID, and that experience has changed how I practice, changed my business, changed everything about my outlook to the world. And I had to figure out a way to really integrate that into work to make it make sense for me now.
Yeah, so really like as a part of your own identity,
Yeah.
basically. Yeah, and where it wasn't before part of your identity. And and
No.
and that in and of itself being a huge adjustment with just this kind of foreign thing that is so unwanted being a part
Un-
of your identity.
Unwanted is an understatement.
Yeah,
And like
I get
that
it.
it like jeopardizes and threatens everything you've known about
Everything.
yourself and how you
Yes.
work and how you show up and being a professional and all of these different things. It just like flips everything on its head. And it is, yeah, existential crisis ad
Yep.
nauseum everywhere.
Yes.
And so, yeah, absolutely. There's no way that it couldn't have changed all of this.
Yeah, so very much like getting, I mean, and this is like what do you call it? I don't even know what the term is, but I guess a metaphor or I don't know, but like getting the carpet pulled out from underneath you and just, not even realizing that. And then all of a sudden your world is turned upside down and you have to readjust everything. Like it really is just seeing it from a totally different perspective now.
Mhm.
And so, you had mentioned that, having this and then, facing these challenges in the healthcare system and in the medical community too.
Mhm.
I mean, two totally different systems.
Yep.
What was that experience like, as an individual? Look, not as a professional, but just as an
Mm.
individual navigating this.
There aren't words for the level of frustration of just,
Yeah.
when you know that something is wrong with your body,
Yeah.
you've known yourself for decades and your
Hmm.
body is not doing what it used to do, the way that it used to do it. Something feels very off,
Yeah.
and you can't be the person that you used to be. And you talk to professionals who are supposed to help. If you can get access to them, even getting access to doctor was complicated. Um, I had to kind of bully my way into the long COVID clinic to get
Oh,
anybody to see me because they wouldn't see they had very clear like stipulations about who they would and wouldn't see, and I didn't meet the criteria of
wow.
they've decided before even hearing my history that they wouldn't see me. And
Really?
I had to get creative about getting in there. And then along the way had seen multiple other specialists, some of whom were exceptionally gaslighting and just like, ran a test came back fine. And so I must be fine. And had somebody tell me that that's just how my body was now.
Oh, really? Wow.
Like that was the answer for all
Wow.
of these bizarre symptoms and body
Yeah.
going haywire and just not if it wasn't skin, it was GI. If it wasn't GI, it was skeletal muscular pain. If it wasn't that, it was something else. If it wasn't that, it was my hair falling out. If it wasn't this, it was like all of these things. And their answer was, that just must be how you are now. So like
What?
there's just accessing it, which is frustrating. And then after you access it, not being believed is a layer of frustration. And then if you are believed with long COVID, there's no treatments. Like
Yeah.
there's things that they can trial, but after 5 years, we have nothing to show for the research, really.
Right.
Um, so it's still a crapshoot. It's still trial and error. It's still having to find a doctor who's willing to prescribe some stuff off label to see if it helps you, which
Yeah.
is very difficult to find.
Yeah.
And then a lot of ad hoc treatments that people with long COVID say will help them, but you got to have money to pay out of pocket for a bunch of this stuff that's not cheap. And so it's just really frustrating. Even a couple months ago, a month ago, I saw my long COVID clinic doctor, and
Mm-hmm.
she was running through, here's what we've tried, hasn't helped, hasn't helped. We, it was just like going through the list of everything that we've done. And it's like, well, you know that we have this long COVID support group. You could go to that. We have some experts come in. Last week, we had somebody so fabulous. My team keeps talking about how great the speaker was, so there's always that option for you. And I couldn't bring myself to tell her, but she figured it out from the look on my face. She's like, "Oh, were you the speaker?"
Oh, are you serious? That's
I
hilarious.
was like, "Yeah, that was me. I was the speaker." So like this is the experience. Is
Oh,
like
wow.
you become the best expert that you can at this, so much so that the doctors lead you back to yourself. Um,
Right. What a
so
great case illustration of that. Oh my
it's
gosh.
it's funny because it has to be. But it's frustrating when like you've done
Wow.
everything within your power, you've done all the things you're supposed to do, you've tried all the things, you've seen traditional medicine, you've done um
Wow.
holistic path, and there's nothing that's really helped a lot. So
Yeah. And so you're left to your own devices,
yeah.
basically. You can't, like, you've exhausted, what you've believed is supposed to be helpful and what has been told to you. I mean, the
Yeah.
lie, and that may be extreme, I don't know, but the hypocrisy maybe
Myth. It's at least a
myth.
myth.
I appreciate that. Thank you. The myth, I appreciate that. Yeah, the myth of it, where they promise or they tell you that yes, there's always a cure, and I appreciate, that too, because we often, especially in this culture, we think that medical, magic is the first thing. Yeah, and
Hmm.
it's obviously not. And then people don't realize that, sometimes it is going outside of that box and recognizing that there are many different ways to approaching balance or restoration, whatever
Mm.
whatever you want to call that kind of finding, whatever that looks like with that pendulum, because it's so just frustrating, basically.
Hmm.
Some of our listeners may not know what long COVID is, so I'm
Hmm.
wondering if you are okay kind of sharing your understanding of it and recognizing just, what you're willing to share with it.
Yeah. I'm going to do my best here because I didn't prepare for this question, but
Sorry, sorry.
so that's okay. No, that's okay. So long COVID is essentially, it's not from the acute infection, but it's after the acute infection. Sometimes people don't fully kick that virus, and so it there's a different understanding. There might be viral persistence that's the cause, that the virus is still around. It might be particular damage to certain organs or certain systems that might be the reason that this happens, but there's different subset of symptoms, but there's over 200 symptoms of long COVID, and not everybody has all of them. Long COVID can also just be one of those symptoms, but essentially it's a post-COVID impact to your health of either new symptoms or worsened symptoms from a previous condition that are caused by the COVID virus. And so the kind of telltale symptom is it gets framed as fatigue, and that's hilarious because it's not fatigue. It is literally your mitochondria are damaged, and so they don't produce energy in the way that they should be
Oh,
producing energy and that healthy bodies produce energy. And so it's, I try to equate it to if you've had a terrible flu and your worst hangover and you just ran a marathon, that's a day in the life of like trying to exist with long COVID. You just never have energy. Um, the other sign that like kind of is a telltale sign is brain fog, which is a form of cognitive dysfunction, and actually some significant research that shows it's a form of like brain trauma and damage to the brain. And so it can come up in word finding difficulties, memory problems, difficulty focusing, a lot of different ways that that showed up for people. But essentially, there's a lot of different subsets. It can look a lot of different ways for people. It's still kind of a mystery. They're still continuing to do research. I hope that they will be able to continue to do research, as certain grants have gotten cut.
Oh,
But
yeah.
we don't have answers for and treatments for it yet. And so some people do get better on their own over
Hmm.
time, but a lot of people don't. And some of us have been dealing with this for 5 years now. And
Yeah.
so it's really, it can be really life altering. It can be really, uh, I describe it from my experiences. There's not a part of my life that it doesn't touch.
Oh, wow. So it just encompasses basically like like a whale swallowing you, pretty much.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And then the world has also moved on and pretended like COVID hasn't happened and isn't still with us and
Yes.
isn't still causing long COVID. So it's a weird way to move through the world with this thing that nobody really can help you with and nobody wants to acknowledge at the same time.
Yeah, and that's a really great point because it's almost as though like people want to forget that it happened in
Yeah.
a way. Yeah, right. I mean, is that kind of what you're also,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
I mean, we were quick, I think, in the mental health field to name the pandemic as a collective trauma,
Yeah.
but we
Mm-hmm.
never dealt with that trauma.
We didn't.
We
No.
just, here's some vaccines and let's everybody go back to the lives that you had, and not actually dealt with
Yeah.
the realities of what this virus can do.
Yeah.
And those of us who are still paying the price from infections and yeah, so we haven't done a good job
Yeah. No, I'm
if
I'm with you there.
dealing with anything. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I'm totally with you there because I agree completely that it has been very traumatic for a lot of people
Yeah.
and affected people. I mean, it impacted everybody on a certain level, and people are not necessarily willing or ready to explore that, which then has a different
No,
impact on them. And
exactly.
sometimes people don't want to hear that certain symptoms might be related to that as
No,
well.
no, of course, and of course they don't,
Of
because
course.
that's scary,
It is.
to
Yes.
acknowledge that. But it's part of what has led this to be perpetuated the way
Yeah.
that it has. Yeah.
Yeah. So as a professional then too, I mean, this is, part of that. How have you been navigating, having this trauma from the pandemic, where you had this previous life, because I can relate in some way to this as well. And just having this life before the pandemic, and then the pandemic just radically changed you in ways that you were not expecting and really changed your world. And so, as a professional, having kind of re-identified yourself or finding a different identity, however you describe that, how have
Mhm.
you kind of navigated that?
That's a great question. It's a little bit still TBD, still
Yeah,
in the
you
middle of
right.
figuring some of that out. I think, personally, there's a lot of grief. I am really super grateful to have a therapist who also has long COVID. And
Oh,
so that's a lot of where I spend my time in therapy, is
yeah,
reckoning with all of this and reckoning with being somebody who people would probably describe as somewhat type A, and now I can't do a fraction of what I can only do a fraction of what I used to be able to do. So
yeah,
there's the personal kind of processing of that. And then professionally, that's part of why I had to change gears with my work.
yeah,
and rebrand and refocus on working with the people that I'm working with, because I think it's a both and of, I have some new knowledge and lived experience and expertise that I can offer to these groups of folks who've been really harmed by the medical and mental health fields for not understanding this type of experience. But it also is a little bit like working with my peers. Those are
Yes.
the people who get what it is to have your life upended when you didn't ask for any of this. And there's only so much you can actually do to influence this.
Yeah, and that's a really great and that's a different relationship too
Yeah.
than that you've had before from a professional standpoint because it's a different kind of lived experience.
Yeah, it's funny, like, I think a lot of us tend to find our niche within things that we have some personal experience with, and that was what I was doing before. It was also like I spent a long time reclaiming parts of myself after building a life that wasn't really my life. It was a
Mm,
life I thought I was supposed to live. And so when I started my practice, that's who I was working with. I was working with people who were also depressed because they weren't living the life that they needed to make them happy. It's the same idea. It's just like I've shifted, and so now I needed to shift and make that move to be able to do the kind of work that I wanted to be doing with folks.
yeah, yeah. There is a quick question.
Yeah.
So um is it common to self-isolate with long COVID as a coping mechanism?
I'm not sure what self-isolate means in this concept, but I will say that ooh, there's a lot of things that come to mind with that.
Okay.
Without
Me just explain the scenario. So
Oh,
Yeah.
sure.
my sister has long COVID. We
Okay.
used to talk weekly on the phone. She lives in Virginia, so that was a method of communication.
Mhm.
It's affected her ability to speak. And
Ah.
so I think as a result, we're not talking, but also I rarely hear from her anymore. Other than, I recall in the past she expressed her frustration with a medical institution. So,
Mhm.
and trying to get a definitive answer. But I'm just concerned for her because I don't know if she has a therapist. I doubt it that she's seeing
Mm.
one. And this has been going on for quite some time. So I don't know, is that common to just kind of, and maybe it's because she can't talk very well, her speech is all garbled. So I don't know.
Yeah. I think I don't want to say exactly what's going on for somebody that I don't know, but I think there's a couple things that come to mind. For one, yes, for some people, speech and speaking is difficult for them. And so it's either like getting out of breath or difficulty finding words. And those type of conversations that used to be an easy, just, hey, how's it going? Catch me up on what's going on in your life, are actually very difficult now and
Mm.
can be exceptionally draining and hard for a number of reasons. And so if it's the speech aspect of things, I've worked with some people on accommodations of doing more like typing correspondence,
Mm.
even if it's getting on live chat, so that it's still back and forth pretty quickly. That can be an accommodation there. There's also just socializing in general is exceptionally hard for a lot of folks, even if there's not a speech problem. It's a form of exertion. And with long COVID, if there is the energy issue, it can be a very big exertion to socialize at all. Full disclosure, I don't have a major social life anymore because keeping up with it is exceptionally draining. And so, yeah, I do think that what you're reading as isolation from her might be part coping mechanism of managing symptoms, and it could be part necessity of just like trying not to overexert. Um, and I think there's also a part where a lot of folks with long COVID feel so misunderstood and people don't get it. And if they don't get it enough, it can be really hard to relate to people. And then it's like an extra layer of trying to help people understand. So I think that there are some social ramifications that can certainly have for people.
Thank you. That helps me understand.
Yeah.
I feel bad, like she's trying to shun me, but it probably has to do with her medical condition. Yeah.
Yes.
I would assume that
Yeah.
Yeah.
first. I
Yeah.
understand why it would feel and land the way that it
Right.
is, but anytime somebody's coping with a chronic condition like this that
Mhm.
is upending their life in this way, it is really hard, and it takes a lot to even find the words to describe what that process is like. So
Yeah.
she might not have a good vocabulary to put words to that for herself either.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, especially if she doesn't have anyone to process what's
Right.
happening with her about it, and not
Yeah.
really knowing what's happening for her. And
Yeah.
so how do you explain that to anybody if you're not understanding what's happening with yourself? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you spending your time with us and sharing your experiences. I learned a lot and I can relate to that. And I really appreciate you also talking about how, like, a lot of things, this exertion I think is really important. And I might try to talk you into coming back to talk more about that
Please,
because
I'd be happy to.
I think that's a really important thing that we as a society don't recognize about
Yeah.
people, that energy and the expenditure of it is really important.
That's what I gave my talk about at the Long
Oh,
COVID
that's so
clinic. So
funny.
I'm
Oh,
totally prepared to talk about that.
oh, that would be great. Yeah, because I don't think people really realize how much energy things take.
Yeah.
And that when you have something like long COVID or chronic fatigue or anything like that, people that have those kinds of medical conditions, they do have to work their life a little bit differently, or if you have a mental health issue or, other things, like these are things that
Absolutely.
require different ways of dealing with it. And so, yes, I'll just bring you back if that's okay.
Please do.
Excellent. Great. All right. So there is contact information for Steph Fowler up on the screen for you. You can reach out to her if you have any questions. And yes, I really appreciate you spending your time with us and sharing your experience and bringing in your personal experience as well. So thank you everybody for watching, for those of you watching live. And then a recording will be available shortly. And then if you do have any questions or anything, you can always follow up, and we'll see you back in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.